In this video, I'm going to show you how to completely level up your AI coding workflows. You're going to be plugging your AI coding agent straight into one of the world's largest coding repositories and leveraging the vast compute power that it has to level up the way that you analyze your code for bugs. It's going to be a complete game changer because we'll be able to integrate the 5 stages of testing that we talked about in my previous episode in the easiest way possible. As always, with all of my videos, everything you'll hear about today is captured in a study guide that I've linked in the description below. There's also an amazing prompt there that you can use that'll completely one-shot this whole thing for you, so you barely have to do anything other than set up a couple of tools at the start. I hope you enjoy my content, and if you do, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me as a creator, and it also helps me continue to produce content that matters for people. All right, let's get into it. As you probably know from the previous episode, the goal of this series is to create an entirely AI-centric development environment that you can plug into all of your AI workflows. Super helpful for things like vibe coding, if you've gotten into the OpenClaw thing, and like just anything to do with AI. By the end of the series, you're going to have something that you'll be absolutely amazed at how well it levels things up. So let me give you a quick rundown of where we're up to and why this is so important. In the previous episode, I talked about how to build a testing framework that really makes sure that your code is being shipped without obvious bugs, that it works properly, and allows you to build steadily more and more complex things. However, if you really get into this, you'll quickly notice there's some problems with this approach. Firstly, it's very taxing on your machine. Unless you've got a really high-end laptop, running all of these tests constantly, particularly if you're developing multiple apps at the same time, it just burns through your compute capacity. It's not uncommon for you to just run out of memory or disk space or all sorts of issues, and that can be really frustrating. It also completely defeats the entire purpose of doing this with AI. Like, if you can't do multiple things at once, honestly, why bother? The second problem is that you're entirely dependent on your AI agent remembering to do all of these steps every single time, even if you put those rules into your local repository. Now, I can tell you from personal experience that is just not going to happen every single time. There are times where under pressure, your AI agent will forget about it, and all of a sudden you ship this really insecure code that could have just been fixed with a simple scan. We really don't want to have to rely on that. And thirdly, as you may have found if you ran this prompt on your machine, it actually takes a long time to set up. I mean, if you've never done it before and you've got a complex web app, you could be talking about multiple hours for your AI agent to figure it out. That burns a lot of your AI capacity. You're burning tokens for no reason. And when you're trying to do this on multiple apps at the same time, man, is it frustrating. The problem is this leaves us with 2 conflicting conclusions. The first thing is adding all of this testing into your development is actually an entirely good thing. We definitely want to keep doing that. I mean, having better code that allows you to scale faster is just 100% a good thing. The problem is trying to do it locally or just using local resources is quickly going to grow challenging. So we want to move forward from there. What we're going to do in this episode is introduce a solution or the start of a solution to this problem. And we're going to be doing that using something called GitHub. Before I get into why we're using GitHub, or at least why we're using that specific platform, I'll talk a little bit about how we got to what we need to do in the first place. So one of the things that you have probably come across as you're developing code is you end up with this like dual purpose mentality that you need to try and keep in your head. On the one hand, you have production code, which is where you've got your customers, your resources, they're already using it, and you want to keep that running for sure. At the same time, you also want to be developing new features to keep people engaged. I mean, if you've got a website, you might be adding an AI chatbot to it, you might be adding all sorts of stuff. So you have these 2 competing priorities. You have your production workflow and you have the need to develop new features. This was actually a problem that a lot of developers came across a long time ago. And they ended up realizing that they needed something called a version control system. They needed a way that allowed them to take production code, copy it in some way, and then develop features on that production code so they could run their 5 levels of testing. And when it was all working perfectly fine, integrate it back into the production code in the least disruptive way possible. Now, doing that at scale for large organizations is an incredibly complex process. We're definitely not going to be getting into that today. What we are going to be doing is looking at the very start of that process and developing that for ourselves. So all of these developers had all of these issues, and they tried a whole bunch of different ways of doing things. It used to be like you'd burn your code onto a CD or put it onto a floppy disk. I never really did that. I was way too young for that. But when I was talking to my grandfather, he used to do that. He'd put the code on the floppy disk, they'd take it to their friend's place or whatever, put it in, and away they go again. Very inefficient and also very frustrating. Well, this problem existed for a while until someone came along and actually developed a system called Git. What Git allowed people to do was to take that whole process of like copying code at a certain point and then developing it and merging it back in and really integrate it into one cohesive flow. Here's what it might look like. So I develop my code and I do my first commit and then I push it live. So we've got a production branch. At some point in time when I develop a feature, I then do a branch of that code, which effectively splits the code out, and I can work on this branch while the production code keeps going. When I've finished working on my feature branch, then I can push it back into the main thing, and the main branch then adopts all of those changes, goes through a bunch of tests to make sure that it works, unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and then away we go. My production gets updated. Now after that, what happens is we then deploy that code into our production environment. It runs in containers or however you've got that set up, and away we go. The point is that we ended up with this amazingly simple to use thing called Git. Very simple to use, but exceptionally powerful. And this quickly became the global standard for what was happening in terms of code development. Well, once this started to happen, people quickly realized that this is something that could absolutely scale. And very soon after that, we started to get the concept of internet-driven development, which rode the internet wave and all that sort of stuff. And so along came these companies that tried to make it something that you could do online. So now, instead of having all of these Git branches and that sort of stuff locally on your machine, you could also integrate it with a remote repository or a remote. And that allowed you to do some really, really interesting things. One, you have your own place where you're storing code that is completely separate from your machine. So if you do something that just busts your machine and completely destroys it, it actually doesn't matter because it's all stored on this remote thing. It also means that if you're in a team of people working on this stuff, everyone can be checking out all different branches at different points in time, working on their thing, and provided you've got the right CI CD pipeline set up, integrate it back in consistently. In fact, for some of the really, really fast moving teams, they can be having tens and hundreds of these branches all happening simultaneously and just constantly merging. It's one of the reasons why you see these like little feature updates constantly rather than these massive monolithic mergers that are just so prone to having issues. Now, you might be thinking, that's great, that's wonderful. How does this actually relate to me when I just want to use my AI coding environment? And that's a very, very good question. So because we have all of this stuff in place, if we're using something like GitHub, it actually allows you to do some really incredible stuff. For instance, and this is what we're going to be majoring on today, when you have this code in a remote repository, you can actually set up GitHub to run all of the tests that we talked about in the first episode, but run it remotely. What's that mean? Well, that means that your computer, your laptop or your desktop or your Raspberry Pi, or whatever you're developing on when you're watching these videos, doesn't have to do all of that testing locally. Now, for AI code development, that's an incredibly powerful concept because your AI can actually be developing all of these things all at once and just pushing them off to GitHub to get analyzed and then ingesting the results and doing something with it. And that's what we're going to be achieving today. Now, that was a super quick run through, and I've only just scratched the surface, so we're really going to get into the actual coding now. So let's get into it. So the first thing you want to do, if you haven't done this already, is to go and sign up for GitHub. It's really easy. Just go to this site here, github.com. I've included that link into the description, and you go along here and you click the sign up button. Fill in your details, away you go. I've already got an account, so I'm not going to create a new one. Once you've done that, what we actually want to do is to download something called the GitHub CLI or command line interface. Now this nifty little tool, what it does is it allows you to control your GitHub from your terminal on your laptop or desktop. Now that's really interesting because once you can do that, you can connect your AI coding agent like Codex to it and it'll do everything else for you. So there's lots of different ways to do it. If you go to the site, also I've added this in the description. This is the official site on how to go about installing it onto your local machine. I'm using a Mac, so it's going to tell me to download for Mac. Now, once you've done that, what you want to do is you want to authenticate your GitHub CLI to your GitHub that you've just signed up for, or if you already had an existing account, to that one. That's really straightforward. So what you're going to do is you're going to run this command, gh auth Okay, it's going to come up with a bunch of things that you can read about, and we want login. So we go ghauth login. It's going to ask you some questions. Now, what you want to do is to use this option, github.com. You want to do it via HTTPS. You want to authenticate Git with your GitHub credentials, which is what you just signed up with. And you want to log in with your web browser. As soon as I push enter here, on a different screen, which you can't see, it'll go ahead and open up my thing. I would then go ahead and authenticate it. That's actually all you need to do. And after this, the rest of it is completely up to the prompt. The prompt I'm about to show you is absolutely incredible. It'll completely one-shot everything that we've talked about today. And effectively, it's going to take all of your CI CD work that you were doing on your laptop, desktop, or wherever you were doing it, and put it all onto GitHub for you using that CLI that you just installed. It's actually amazing. Now, if you're just here for the prompt, you can absolutely go to the study guide. I've got it there, and copy and paste it into your AI coding agent, and away you go. If you're interested in sticking around to see how this works and learn a little bit more about prompt engineering, then you can absolutely stick around for that as well. Don't forget, whatever you do, to please give me a like or a subscribe. That really helps boost my numbers and also helps me to get more visibility, which in turn helps me build far more content for you. All right, let's get into the prompt. As with all good prompt engineering, the first thing you want to do is actually define the scope of what you want your AI agent to do. This is really, really important. It's effectively like framing the problem that it's there to solve. For us, we're very clear about what we want to do. We want to minimize our local verification. We want to make sure that we're still enforcing full validation and security, but we want to do it through GitHub using something called GitHub Actions. And that the only way you can get code into main or production is via doing all of these checks. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. We also want to talk about the assumptions that the AI agent can assume that we're going to have. First of all, that GitHub CLI is super important. That will allow the AI agent to configure everything for you. It's honestly probably the most important thing about this episode other than the prompt itself. And then we just run through a couple of other assumptions that GitHub will be the source of truth, local verification exists, and that GitHub Actions is the primary way we're going to be doing it. From there, we move into our core enforcement rules. Now, these are really, really important, and the best way I can describe them is like setting out the strategy of what you're trying to do. So we go into our minimal local verification, which we talked about before. Okay, here's a bunch of rules around what that's going to be looking like, what the strategy is going to look like for that. Number two, our core strategy is that we must protect the main branch, which is your production branch. Again, so we run through a bunch of rules around that. No direct pushes, dismiss stale approvals. Like, if you're really into Git, you'll understand what these mean. It took me a while to develop it, but honestly, this will just really help. The third thing is that we want full validation runs in GitHub Actions. Again, super important. So it's one of the core rules. What that basically tells the AI agent is, the moment that something's committed to GitHub based on these conditions, you must check it before it goes into production. This one you'll remember if you were watching the previous episode, okay, that all local validations happen in containers. I go through why in that episode, just to make sure that we have a solid testing environment. We cover off a bit of a case which is for web apps, so make sure that we're very clear about what must happen for them and how we're going to do our end-to-end testing. We reinforce that security is mandatory. Okay, and we talk about what that might look like. From there, we move into what our overall process is going to be. And this is like the bulk of what we're trying to achieve here. So it's very, very important. We start by telling it to audit the repository truth. So we want to detect what languages, frameworks, packages, Docker files, compose files, a whole bunch of things are already there. So what are we saying there? That's why you can take this prompt and apply it to any code base. It's going to auto detect things for you, make your life so much easier. Next, we're going to design the workflow topology. So we're going to create a clear GitHub Actions model that includes everything that's listed there. Once again, we're really setting this up to make sure that it can all do that all for you. From there, we want to implement a series of validation layers in GitHub. So we talk about what static checks we're going to be, then we go through what our cybersecurity checks are going to be, run through everything there, talk about what we expect in a unit test. You can see the coverage threshold of 90% there. Talk about our integration tests, our end-to-end tests. Okay, so what we've done there is we've basically lifted everything that we talked about in that first episode and just shoved it straight onto GitHub to do for you. Now what we have to do is talk about the process of actually going through and working through this. So what does that look like? Well, we're going to build our GitHub workflow. It's called a workflow topology, and we build it in GitHub. So we do our pull request, talk about what that looks like, exactly how to work through that, how long we're going to wait for timeouts, and so on. Then we talk about our workflow to go from when you upload your code in a branch to we get it into main, which gets it into production. And we talk through our security workflow, what that's going to look like, a deployment workflow. And then we talk a little bit about what to do at the end, which is your post-deployment smoke checks. The rest of the things, the next few things then, are talking a little bit about how we set up the framing so that it basically becomes almost impossible for your AI agent to get around this. So we talk about how we're going to configure our GitHub protection, how we harden our workflow security, how to add observability and a fail-fast behavior, how to persist what you've done. So now we're telling it to rewrite its agent's MD or equivalent, okay, which tells it exactly the same thing, so it can't really get around it. And then we go ahead and ask it to validate itself, which is to confirm that it's intentionally minimal, full quality bar, confirm the required check names, and so on. The final part of the prompt then is really talking a little bit about what we expect to be delivered, which is our deliverables, what the acceptance criteria is, and what we expect it to come back to us with. Now, this is a huge prompt. I really recommend that you run it in plan mode or the equivalent for your agent. Codex would be plan mode before you do it, and then you go ahead and implement it. And you'll find this will completely level up your coding flows. It's pretty cool. Well, there you have it. Now you've built your first external CI CD pipeline on GitHub. It's nowhere near close to being finished with what we want to do with our series, but far out. You've already made incredible progress. So go you. Congratulations. What we're going to do from here is we're going to shift the series into really getting into some really AI-centric problems and how to solve them. Our end goal is to really create that environment that just allows your AI development to be completely fluid and natural, completely leveled up. Right, well, I'll see you in the next episode.